Welcome back, boys and girls, to another exciting episode of Feltboard Theater. We're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 17 today. 1 Samuel chapter number 17. We're going to continue on with the life of David, and we're going to talk about this amazing battle between David and Goliath. Now, before we continue, it's time to go over our memory verse for this week. Psalm 118, verse 8. It is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. Psalm 118, verse 8. Let's say it again. Psalm 118, verse 8. It is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. Now, just to give us a quick recap of the story, David had come out from tending the sheep. He was out at his house, and he was taking care of the sheep, and he sees the Philistine army, which had camped against the Israeli army. And the Bible tells us that David saw Goliath, who was a giant of a man. And this man was making fun of the Israelites. He was calling them cowards and chicken and all that stuff. He wanted them to fight him. And he knew that because of his size, no one would have the courage to face him. Goliath taunting the children of Israel went on for weeks, almost about 6 weeks. And every morning and every evening, he would go up and down and parade all over the place, just begging someone to come down and fight him. The Israelite soldiers, however, they had some information. They said, hey, listen, King Saul has offered a reward for whoever kills Goliath. He says, if you defeat Goliath, I'll give you my daughter for a wife, and you won't have to pay taxes or be my servant anymore. But the soldiers were all frustrated because there's like, well, there's nothing we can do. We can't beat Goliath. We'll never win. And so all of a sudden, David comes along, and he's talking with his brothers, and they make fun of him a little bit, like, why did you come down here? And you just came down to watch the fight. And David's pretty upset. He's fired up for the Lord. And he's like, no, this man is defying God. And who is he to defy God? And he's thinking, why can't we stand up to this man who is mocking God and, obviously isn't on God's side? Why are we afraid of him? We have God on our side. What do we have to worry about? So King Saul hears about how brave David is, and he comes down because he wants to hear about this little guy who, is being so brave. And he talks to David, and David's like, yeah, King Saul, we have to go fight this Philistine. We've got God on our side. What are we worried about? So King Saul, who should have been the one who was fighting the Philistine, Goliath, instead gives David his armor, his shield, and his sword, and his helmet, and says, here, David, you go ahead and go fight Goliath. Well, the problem was the armor and everything, the sword, it was too big for David. David was too small. You could see there's a pretty big difference between the two here. King Saul was tall and brawn and big, and David was just a young man. And so it wasn't going to work. David couldn't use his armor. And so David says, hey, can I just use my sling? So David bravely stands up and calls out to Goliath and says, I will face you, Goliath. David goes down to confront Goliath. Goliath making fun of him the whole time, saying, wow, you're just going to send a kid to come fight me? And he called the Israelites a bunch of cowards. David stops along a stream, picks up 5 smooth stones, puts one in his sling, twirls it around, and lets it loose. And that, the Bible tells us, that stone flew and hit Goliath right between the eyes, and it killed him, just like that. Now, let me ask you a question. Was it David who killed Goliath, or was it God who killed Goliath? I'll tell you right now, a little stone thrown in a sling is pretty scary. It can be deadly, but I believe in my heart that it was the power of God that killed Goliath through David. Now, that's awesome. That's exciting that, God kept his promise to David. David was probably scared. He was probably a little nervous, but he had a lot of confidence in God, which is what was important. And he went down there and he took that sling and he took those stones and he did what was the right thing to do in that situation. And man, Goliath fell. The Bible tells us in 1 Samuel 17, verse 47, it says, all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. Boys and girls, young David understood something that King Saul did not. He understood that it's better to obey God than men. He understood what our memory verse is trying to teach us in Psalm 118. It's trying to teach us that we can trust in God. We can have confidence in God. If David had been afraid of men, if he had been more worried about what men could do to him, then he would have never faced off against Goliath. Boys and girls, we should not have courage in our own abilities, but courage in God's abilities to take care of us and to watch over us and to protect us and to accomplish his will in our life. Boys and girls, we have many different difficulties that we will face in this life, and that's okay because we're going to have God with us the entire time. I hope that helps you this morning. I look forward to seeing you again Wednesday night for another exciting episode of Feltboard Theater.